All right, so this week is called self-awareness, and really how I view this and why I include this right at the beginning of this course is because I think there's so much value to knowing yourself, um, and that really sets you up for success. And so to change your habits, you have to know yourself. To know how to best support yourself, you need to know yourself. For me to be able to support you in the best way that you respond to, we have to know who you are. And so there's 3 tests that I got you guys to do. And I'm going to break up the training into the 3 tests by themselves because it's a lot of information all at once. So right now we are going to talk about the four tendencies test. And so how Gretchen Rubin, who is the one who is behind this test, describes it is knowing that our tendency, so she's got 4 tendencies that you'll fall into a category. Knowing our tendencies helps us to set ourselves up to make it more likely that we will achieve our goals. We'll make better decisions, meet deadlines better, make promises that we actually keep, we actually have less stress, and we just engage with others in a better way when we know what tendency we are. So here is kind of a little overview of the 4 tendencies. So there's upholders, there's obligers, there's questioners, and there's rebels. So kind of just a brief thing that is kind of the sum of each of these is the upholders can make commitments to themselves and to others. Obligers make commitments to others and really to respond well when there's a commitment to external people, but not to themselves. Questioners have a very strong commitment to themselves when they have all their information that they need. And then rebels have a really big problem with commitment and really getting on board when either themselves or other people tell them to. So we're going to go into details about all of them. This is kind of another way to look at it. Upholders respond to outer and inner expectations. Questioners question all expectations, but once they do have all the information they need, it will become an inner expectation. Rebels resist all inner and outer expectations, and obligers meet outer expectations, struggle with inner expectations. So you'll hear me talk a lot about, because that's how she kind of talks about it, with outer versus inner expectations. And we're actually going to hear Gretchen talk about each of these tendencies and give you a bit more information on it. So again, here's just another overview. I'm putting this all in there in different kind of formats because we all kind of intake things differently. I'm pretty visual, so something like this would be very helpful. Someone who kind of wants to read it and that helps them retain it, I'm going to do it in a different way. So I'm just kind of giving you guys different ways to ingest the information, and hopefully one will really stick with you. So we are going to start with an upholders. So I'm going to show you a little video from Gretchen Rubin on upholders.
First category, upholders. Upholders respond readily to outer expectations and inner expectations alike. They find it easy to meet a deadline. They find it pretty easy to keep a New Year's resolution. For them, these things happen pretty readily. And so an upholder is motivated by fulfillment. An upholder goes and they wake up and they say, what's on the to-do list today? What's on the schedule today? And they like to just go through and get things done. They don't like to let people down. They hate getting in trouble or being blamed for things or making mistakes. They like to know what the expectations are, and they like to meet them. It's very satisfying to them. So if you're in an organization or you're working with an upholder, or you are an upholder, or you're in a relationship with an upholder, There's pros to that. Upholders are great if you need to know what the rules are and have somebody follow them. If it's important to be a self-starter, upholders don't need deadlines. They don't need late fees. They don't need a lot of scrutiny or supervision. They sometimes look for rules beyond the rules in things like art or technology or ethics. They say, these are the rules everybody's talking about. What are the rules beyond the rules? But like all of these categories, there's a dark side. There's the pro and the con. All of these categories include people who are very successful and people who are big losers. All of these have pros and they have cons too. And the negative side of being an upholder is to be too driven by the gold star, to have it be too important to know what the rules are, to be boxed in by the rules. There's almost kind of a paranoia that can set in for upholders. You know, what's expected of me? What am I supposed to do? They can become overwhelmed and paralyzed if it's not clear what expectations are and be ambiguous what you're supposed to do. And when it comes to making and breaking habits, it turns out that upholders really have a relatively easy time for it. And in fact, what I've noticed is that if you look at the people who are giving advice about how to make and break habits, they're all upholders. It makes perfect sense because we're the people, we love habits, we're attracted to them, and we find it pretty easy to keep them. So that's the upholder. That is easier if you're an upholder.
Okay, so upholders. So upholders are pretty self-directed, pretty self-motivated. They can stick to things. So when she says inner and outer expectations, something that I heard her compare it to one time was an upholder can make a goal and they can use their future self as something that is holding them accountable. So they're like, I want to be able to run 5 kilometers and my future self is going to be so happy with that. I worked hard, I accomplished that. And that's enough for them to keep motivated. And I am an obliger. We're going to talk about that later. And I struggle so much with inner expectations. So that is mind-boggling to me that you can just use your future self as an accountability partner. Man, that would solve a lot of my problems. So upholders really, they can motivate themselves to do stuff. They also really respond well when other people help motivate them. So an obliger. We're going to hear back from Gretchen again.
Finally, obligers. Obligers resist, they respond readily to outer expectations, but they have a lot of trouble meeting their own internal expectations. Like a friend of mine who said, you know, when I was on the track team in high school, I never missed a track practice, but I can't make myself go running on the weekends myself. That's an obliger. Obligers are motivated by external accountability. They wake up in the morning and say, what do I have to do today? They don't like being blamed. They don't like letting people down. They like to meet external obligations, but they have a very, very, very tough time holding themselves accountable. And so the key for obligers is to create those systems of external accountability, whether you're working with an obliger or you're an obliger yourself. Now, the thing about obligers is, like, these people, obligers are the rock. These are the people that show up. These are the people who come through. These are the people who volunteer when no one else is volunteering. So they will deliver for others. Obligers themselves are the ones that, for the most part, bear the negative consequences of being an obliger. They say things like, I'm a people pleaser and I don't like it. Or, why is it that I can always make time for other people's priorities, but I can never make time for the things that are important to me? The secret is external accountability. There have to be those systems in place or they just don't deliver. Like a friend of mine who was like, oh, for years I wanted to take yoga. You know, I never did. Finally, I signed up for a yoga class. I went one time. It was the $600 yoga class. You know, and I could have told her, I was like, you're an obliger. You had to create some kind of system of external accountability. Like, go with a friend who's going to be really annoyed if you don't show up. Or, go to an instructor who's going to hound you by email if you don't show up. You know, go to a class where they charge you triple if you're a no-show. Like, create systems of external accountability. And that will help. And again, when trying to make habits and break bad habits, obligers need to think of ways to get that sense of external accountability. And some people are super creative with it. For instance, I know somebody who wanted to take piano, and she said, well, I knew I would never practice piano, so I signed up with my children, and they'll know if I don't practice. So she had to do it because of her obligation as a role model. Or I know a guy who was taking photography, and he said, well, I knew I would never do it. I would never stick to it. So I decided that every semester I would sign up for one class at the International Center of Photography. And he said, and I did that for several semesters, and I was taking tons of pictures, and I loved it. And so finally I said, oh my gosh, I totally know what I'm doing. I love doing it. I don't need to bother taking a class. Guess how many photographs I've taken since I stopped taking a class? One. Like, the systems of external accountability are super, super important.
Okay, so obligers. So obligers are people who, want to meet can and do really well with outer expectations, but struggle to meet inner expectations. Like I was saying, I'm an obliger. So if I make a goal for myself, and especially if I don't tell anyone about it, there is a very low chance I will get it done. This is why people who are obligers do well with like courses like this, personal trainers, people who are waiting on them, like signing up for a fitness class or something where they paid like money to be in it and stuff. And this tendency is more likely to be the people pleaser, willing to put others' needs first, aside, like other than their own. And so, sorry, let me just, oh, there we go. So obligers should be like utilizing what their strengths are and not trying to like change themselves. Sometimes people think like, oh, I don't have good inner accountability, I need to work on that. What I've learned, especially as an obliger myself, just utilize the accountability that's out there. Like, there is so much out there that you can implement into your routine system, whatever you're like struggling with or you need to keep yourself on track with. There's so many different ways of holding yourself accountable outside of yourself. And so obligers really just need to get creative and find what works for them rather than trying to change who they are, because that's really not going to be authentic to them and something that's going to last. So yeah, if they are only accountable to themselves, and so that's why you see a lot of people who like have done something before and done well with it, and then do something very similar but do it by themselves and they're not so successful with it, and they don't really see what the difference is. And the difference is that they didn't have that outer accountability as part of the second equation. So now we're going to talk about the questionnaire. So I'm using a different thing, and I hope that this works, that you can see this screen and the volume works as well.
Next, questioners. Questioners question all expectations. They'll do it if they're convinced it makes sense. If they don't think so, they won't do it. So in a way, questioners make all expectations into inner expectations because they have to endorse the idea of whatever the expectation is. Questioners wake up in the morning and they think, what needs to get done today? They are very motivated by sound reasons. They want to know that there's reasons for what they're doing, that what they're doing makes sense, that it's logical. And they hate anything that's arbitrary or that isn't fair. And for some reason, also, they have a weird thing about waiting in line. I haven't really figured that out. The questioners seem to have like this weird hatred of waiting in line. Now you can see, again, like with the upholders, there's obvious pros and cons. If you're in an organization or if you're with a questioner, there's a lot of, they are intellectually engaged. They love research, they love information, they love reasons. That can be incredibly helpful because they're going to say, well, you say this report is due on Friday. I mean, why is it due on Friday? Why are we doing a report at all? Why are we doing it this way? Who says? And that can be very, very helpful. And they can be, and if they make up their minds to do something, they're very good at sticking to it. Downside, it can be tiresome. Questioners can be tiresome for others, and they find it tiresome for themselves. They will often say, I wish I could give it up. I wish I could just let it go, but I can't. I have to keep going and going. And other people get exhausted by it. Like, like, gosh, the team has decided, give it up, move on. We this is what it is. And also, they can sometimes become paralyzed when they feel like they don't have perfect information, which is often not realistic. Now, when it comes to making a good habit or breaking a bad habit, it's very important for questioners to feel like they know why they're doing what they're doing. So for instance, I have a friend who's a questioner who had cancer, and he was not convinced by what his doctor was telling him to do. So he didn't do it. Was this a healthy thing to do? Probably not, but he wasn't convinced. And so if you're trying to help a questioner make or break a bad habit, or if you yourself are the questioner, it's very important to take the time to put yourself through the paces to understand what you're doing. Now, I do this very crazy strength training routine at a gym, and one of my trainers said that he is a guy who's been training there for years. Every time he comes in, he's like, why are we doing it this way? Why are we doing it that way? And that's how he keeps himself coming, is he has to agree and decide that this makes sense. This is the right way to do strength training. So that's how a questioner would approach it.
So questioners readily respond to internal expectations, really only. External expectations really get questioned, just like their name. So they really need to buy into something before they can kind of move forward with something. And so, like she was saying, that really can be a good thing in some cases, and really can be like a difficult thing, especially if you're trying to work in a team and that person can't move on. So they have a really hard time making that decision. But the thing about a questioner is that when they do decide, they are all in. Like once they are justified, they've answered all their questions, they understand the reasoning behind anything, they are kind of unstoppable. So kind of a downside is that they can get in that analysis paralysis. And so she has some good examples of giving yourself a deadline. If you are, sorry, I can't move that. Giving yourself a deadline if you are researching something, trying to get answers to something, and really just have to kind of accept that you're not ever going to get the perfection or the 100% efficiency as you're looking for. I'm pretty sure my husband's a questioner because he will research things. Oh my goodness. It's he has to know that this is the best deal, the best quantity for the price, or best material or best anything. And until he does that, he just will not buy something. And I'm kind of that obliger, and I'm really impulsive. So I'm just oh my gosh, I want it now. So let's just get it. And so it's really funny kind of doing life with people who are different than you. And then once you start to learn about these things, you really can see it. Okay, so last one we're going to talk about is the rebel. So here we go.
Next, rebels. Rebels resist all expectations, inner expectations and outer expectations alike. They want to do what they want to do at all times. And they have trouble even imposing an expectation on themselves. They will not, for the most part, impose an expectation on themselves. Rebels wake up in the morning and they think, hey, what do I want to do today? They're completely motivated by present desire. They want to do what they want to do. And they are very likely to resist if someone else asks them or tells them to do something. In fact, they are very likely to want to do the opposite if someone asks them or tells them to do something. Now, this can be incredibly helpful. In certain situations, like you want to think outside the box, a rebel's going to think outside the box. You want somebody to break the rules, they love to break the rules. They love disruption. They love lawlessness. They're attracted to it, and they thrive in it. And they're also very authentic. You know, they're doing what they want to do. They're very much in touch with what they want, and that can be great. But you can also imagine that it's pretty frustrating to be with somebody who, if you ask or tell them to do something, is going to do exactly the opposite. And this can get to the point with some rebels where I say, oh my gosh, read this book, you're going to love it. You're like, I'm not going to read it. I hate it. That, you know, rebels will, they have this spirit of resistance that can be difficult, and it can also almost allow them to be controlled because they have such a strong desire to do the opposite sometimes of what people tell them. Now, when it comes to making and breaking a habit, you know, you can imagine that this is a little bit of a challenge, because if you say something like, I really think, you know, the doctor says you really need to exercise. I'm not going to exercise. It's not the boss of me. You know, I mean, so how do you do it? So you've got to be very careful if you are a rebel, or if you're working with a rebel, to help them, to make sure that you don't set off exactly the opposite of what you want. Somebody told me a funny story. So her father was a rebel. And they went to the doctor, and he was supposed to take blood pressure medication. So, you know, the doctor's explaining why. And they walk out, and her father said, so do you think I should take the blood pressure medication? And she said, oh, no, I wouldn't bother. He's like, what? You want me to die? And then he took it. Now, some rebels are really able to use their rebel energy to create habits, but they have to do it in a rebel way. So, for instance, I know a couple of rebels who managed to make themselves exercise regularly, which is kind of the opposite of what you would think a rebel would be able to do. So I said, how did you do it? How did you get yourself to do it? And both of them used very similar strategies, which was they focused on the present enjoyment. They did, like as an upholder, I would say, 3 days a week, I'm going to run. You know, they don't do that. They say, I'm waking up today, and I feel like running. And I love running. And I love the feeling of the air rushing past my ears. True thing. That's one of the things he said. I'd never noticed the air rushing past my ears in all my life. It's my chance to listen to music. It's my chance to be free. Interesting, one rebel said, I'm free from having to pay for a gym. So she tied the idea of running to the idea of freedom. So that's the way as a rebel, you can do these things, is by focusing on why you want to do it, why it's a choice that you're doing it, because they're so motivated by the idea of freedom and choice.
All right, rebels. So, really tough time making commitments to anyone, really does not respond well to rules, deadlines, pressure to kind of stick to a plan, and I would assume has kind of a difficulty with that, like authority, because a lot of times a person who has an authority in your life is telling you what to do. And so they want to do what they want to do and how they want to do it. And they will really resist probably every time when something is kind of coming at them. Interesting, they're not as the same as a questioner who also like they struggle to get there, but once it is their decision, they're really all in. Whereas the rebel isn't as convinced. They really, like she was saying, it really has to be a choice. So a really cool example I have, I know someone who's a rebel, and they have their gym bag or shoes like just with them. And so if they decide at lunch they feel like going for a run, they've got their stuff, they're ready to go. But if they don't, then they won't go. And so it's not kind of that like they have to do it kind of thing. They are really like authentic, really carry they really carry themselves as that's a very, very important thing, that they get to be doing things kind of on their terms. But they also, a way to kind of hone that into a positive way is they like meeting challenges, finishing projects, kind of making things, harder to attain. They like that because it kind of like defies the expectations. It's proving other people wrong. And so this can be like kind of a good strategy to use with a rebel. So next up, we're going to be talking about the Enneagram. Enneagram is very detailed, so I will not even be able to kind of scratch the surface, but we will get into it, and hopefully you know what your number is. So if you don't know your number for the Enneagram, go do that, and I would love to hear from these 4 tendencies what tendency you are, an upholder, an obliger, a questioner, or a rebel. So let me know what you are.